sharks were in the cave area, they were docile. But as soon as they come out of the cave area, they're not. So they just started doing different tests to figure it out. They found out that the higher oxygen level of the water in the cave, so it had an extremely higher oxygen level. Well, the higher oxygen level made the sharks docile. It's interesting stuff. You know, we know that pre-flood Earth had higher oxygen levels. So, and like I said, the reason we know that is because of the little bubbles in the amber. Let's see where we have some natural amber. So if you come up and you get to this one right here, you'll see amber down at the bottom, and it has, a lot of times when you find amber, you'll find some insects in it. Because, you know, let's be honest, the tree sap, they get stuck, and then, you know, the amber will catch them, and actually the tree sap will go over them and surround them, and then they're there permanently, and that's what's happened with those. But you also will see that, you know, think about it, the tree sap also has bubbles in it, and that's that oxygen. So what they did is they tested that oxygen, that bubble, and they got the pressure and the oxygen out of it. So it's actually really, really cool. I love the idea of the amber thing, and how they tested it. Because I was asking the question myself when there's like, yeah, we put the oxygen level at pre-flood, and I'm like, okay, where do we get the number? You know, where do we find the information for pre-flood oxygen? But once they said it was in amber, it totally makes sense. So okay, so if you remember this, Timothy, 1 Timothy 6:20 says, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called. Now, remember, this is the only place that you'll find this, if you're in other Bibles, is you're going to have to go to the King James. ICR, which is in Dallas, it's the Institute of Creation Research, they pretty much stick to the King James for their scriptures. Answers in Genesis, which is the National Creation Museum, and also the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, they actually will use all sorts of different Bibles for translations, but when they want this one, they have to go to the King James, and they use it a lot. It's one of the best verses for creation because it is, you know, evolution is false science. Yeah, go ahead.
King James or New King James?
No, King James. So if you study out translations, just a quickie on it, if you study out translations, the King James was translated with what they call the Textus Receptus. The newer Bibles started being translated with two scriptures that came out of the Catholic Church. One was called the Vaticanus because it was locked up in the Vatican for years and years and years. And the other one was the Sinaiticus, which was actually found in a trash can at Sinai, at the cathedral at Sinai. So even the monks had decided it wasn't worth anything. Some guy goes in there and goes, hey, we can translate off of this. Problem is those two scriptures contradict themselves multiple times, and yet they're the main portions of scripture for the newer translated Bible. So we already have some issues with that. Why is it that we have to have so many English translations? And if we do, here's another thing to look at. If we do have a whole bunch of English translations, if you look in a King James Bible, you'll see a copyright. The copyright is actually for everything in it other than Scripture. If you look at a New King James, an NIV, ASV, or you go through any of those, they have a copyright and it's on the Scriptures themselves. If a Bible is translated and it's going to be translated in English when they translate it, it has to be 25% different than any other book to be able to get a copyright, or to be able not to infringe on the other copyright. So if you think about that, that means that 25% of the words in the book had to be changed. So why do I stick with the King James? Because it's not a copyrighted book. It's used with the Textus Receptus. It doesn't have the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus in it. And so basically, it's just a cleaner form. Now, if you go back into some of the older Bibles before it, like the Geneva Bible and all those, they're all translated before anybody would have looked at the Vaticanus or the Sinaiticus. So are they good? Sure. But the King James is the 7th English translation, and God works on sevens. So I stick with it. All right. So anyway, you get this science falsely so called.
Pastor, you said the King James is the 7th?
It's the 7th. A lot of people try to make it the 8th, but if you remember, Tinsdale's Bible was only the New Testament. Okay. So what is science falsely so called? It's that right there. What does that stop? It says stop, quit following me. Why? Because we're not related. We're not related to the ape. My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was not an ape. He was actually a captain in the English army, in the British Army, and when the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth, he came the next year. Not an ape. If he were to sit there.
If it was true, then why would apes keep evolving into people?
Well, here's the whole thing. Well, here's a good question. So I like that question because, so if one evolved into an ape, because we're talking about random chance, how did one male and one female evolve at the same time?
But I would wonder, why do we still have monkeys then? Why would they just keep...
Right, why wouldn't they just be extinct? Because we don't need them anymore?
Not to mention that male and female would have to have the exact same genomes to even reproduce.
Well, they would have to be of the same kind.
Yeah.
Right? So one of the problems we have is we have microevolution and we have macroevolution. If you look at that, so do things change? Because evolution means change, right? Do things change? So do things adapt? Yes, we adapt. So, but here's the problem: we adapt within our kind. Because so if we go to Noah's Ark, how many animals did we need to have to? How many animals do we have to have on the ark? No, but I mean total. So we have to have 2 of every kind, right? We say kind. People say, well, 2 of every kind, well, that's 2 chihuahuas, 2 this, 2 that. We only need 1 dog kind. We only need 2 dog kinds. We need a male and a female. Here's the other thing. We don't need old male and old female. We just need adolescent because they can reproduce. So we only need 2-year-old dogs. But what do those 2 dogs have to have? All the genes that are available now. Right? Once they start breeding, though, what do? We end up breeding out genes. You want a good dog for chasing sheep? You start breeding out genes. And sometimes, because they've already bred some of them out, they have to breed in a gene. But you can only get that gene from where? Another dog. You see? So that's where people get that all. So is there an evolution in a change sense? Sure. But we're talking within the kind. One day you're not going to have a cat and it mate with another cat and you get a dog. Technically, you'd have to have 2 dogs and they'd get a cat because, technically the cat is a better predator. I mean, if you really look at it, because a cat uses everything, where a dog, he might use his paws to hold it, but really his teeth are all his power. The cat has the teeth, the back claw. If you ever look at a mountain lion attack, number one, they attack on the back and they crush the neck. But if they're in a fight, they'll rake with their back feet, where a dog won't. I had a border collie, and we had 2 cats, and the cats would just, when she was a puppy, they'd just smack her. Well, she's border collie, so she's highly intelligent. So she'd sit there and she'd watch them, and as they'd smack, she'd get fast enough to move her head. Well, then she figured out after the first fight that they scratch with their bottom legs. So she knew she had to get them so their legs were down. So if she wanted to hold them still, they couldn't have their legs up because it would hurt. So she'd actually move quick enough that when she did mess with them, she'd pin them straight to the ground, and the cats would just start crying because they were like, they can't do anything. And I know that dog was laughing inside. She's like, yeah, you're all idiots. I figured you out, you know. But really, if you look at it, the cat is the apex predator between the two. So if we're going to have evolution between species, it would have to be like that. Yes, sir.
Looking here in Kansas, what you're talking about, when you stay within your kind, there's been some controversy. White-tailed deer don't mate with mule deer, you know.
Right.
We've got cottontail rabbits, we used to have jackrabbits. They don't cross mate. They are each their own.
But that's racism.
Okay.
Because think about it, can a rabbit mate with a rabbit?
Well, hybrids, aren't they?
Yeah, but they can mate with each other. So technically the rabbit that was on Noah's Ark had all the traits of the jackrabbit, all the traits of a Rex. You know, you ever get one of those Rex? They got all the nice fluffy fur, and you know they actually win most of the time at 4-H. Yeah, you know, because they're nice. You know, and when you ever learn how to show a rabbit, the last one you want is one of those Angora rabbits because their hair is everywhere. You know, and so they're pretty, but all those rabbits can interbreed because they're what? Rabbits. So they're all in their own kind. But you're not going to breed two rabbits and get a pig. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not going to happen. And so in evolution's always trying to get us to believe that there was this transition and we went from one thing to the next. We went from the ape to the chimpanzee to the human being. And that's why we've got black people, is because when we went from the chimpanzee, we became human, we were black, and then we were brown, and then we were white. That's what they'll say. Why? Well, because Darwin wrote the book. You see what I'm saying? And so why is it that? We don't need that. Human is human. We're all in our kind. Now, have things been breeded out? If we want to get truthful looking at genetics and science, us white people are in bad shape. We're in as bad a shape as the black people. The brown people are the ones that are better off because the way the genes sit. You know, they have the dominant genes. Their eyes are brown, their hair is black, and their skin is brown. They don't get sunburnt, and they don't really get frostbite. But you get a black person in the cold, and he doesn't do well. And you get a white person in the heat, and we end up with skin cancer. And I know because I cut it off all the time, right? So, you know, what happened is there's a breeding out. Okay, so it's a loss of information, and so when we get into all that, you have to understand that everything within in its own kind. I mean, if we take a black person and a white person and put them together, we get a brown person. Why? Because now we bred back in the genes that we're missing, that were bred out. Does that make sense?
Well, what about along that same line? What about we've all, even always I am in school, the different skulls that they found, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal.
Okay, let me help you. So I remember sitting. How old are you?
I'm going to be 67.
Okay, so I'm 54. So I took anthropology in high school because I like that kind of stuff. But every time they showed me that stuff, it didn't make sense. Because if you remember, Cro-Magnon had this huge head, and then all of a sudden we went back to a small head. Well, I mean, if our brain is getting bigger and we're smarter, then shouldn't our skull size be, you see what I'm saying? I mean, that's the thought process. Why would our skull be big and then go back to small? The Neanderthal man, the one that they found Neander, or however you want to say, because that's why he's named that. When they found him, they found out there was a group of people that had rickets, and so they have this bone deformity, and so that's why. And he was only from the 1800s, but see, they need a missing link. And so when you get into all that, I can't remember, Doc, was it the Java Man that was just a pig's tooth? I mean, when you get down to those skulls, they only had like one tooth. One, they actually had the skull of an orangutan that they cut off and added it to a human skull and said that that was a transitional form. And actually, the interesting thing about that is that was a student of Ernst Haeckel, who was also basically a friend of Darwin. So, you know, all these people are procreating these lies, just like Doc said. What was the standard that Lyles was saying? Look, we got to get Moses out of the schools.
So are they still showing these skulls and teaching them?
Yes and no, depending on so
Do you guys see these skulls?
So back in the early, we don't see that a lot in schools anymore, because back in the early, in what was it, in the early 50s, 40s and 50s, this scientist starts showing up, and his name is Henry Morris. Now Henry Morris was a phenomenally intelligent man, wonderful scientist. He started basically. He's kind of the main push or the person that everybody looks at for creation science. So nobody really fought science as it was going towards evolution. There was kind of this period of time where evolution got to run free. And then because people were like, well, people believe, so who cares? Well, what happens when we tolerate anything? It gets shoved in our face. The next thing you know, we got people dressing as cats peeing in our classrooms, right? I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, when you hear some of this, I mean, I have a school teacher in here, and she comes in on Wednesdays and says, we need to pray about this. And I'm like, that's really happening? And she's like, yeah, you know, because it is. You know, but why is it happening? Because we tolerate it. Because as Christians, we didn't stand up and say, look, that is child abuse, letting your kid think that they're a cat. And it's also child abuse letting the kid who thinks he's a cat reveal himself to your children in the classroom. So, you know, I mean, when I was a cop, right now, if I was a cop, I'd probably be in jail or sued 1 million times and lost all the money because I would have arrested them on the law that says that they can't expose themselves, and I'd have kept arresting them until some judge did something. Probably the judge would end up doing it to me, saying you're wrong. No, that's child abuse. Okay? But see, it's okay now. Why? Because we didn't fight it when it was starting. You know, now all of a sudden we're like, oh, we got to fight it. Well, it's a little late. You know, not that it's late. I mean, we can still fight it because, you know, God's God. But we let it get too far. And so when you get into the evolution and creation thing, Henry Moore starts coming out, and people, there's probably people that were fighting it before him, but we really don't see them as much. But really, when Henry Morris comes out, there's this explosion of creation science. And all of a sudden it's coming from everywhere. And we're starting as Christians going, hey, wait a minute. This is not good science. This, you know, the evolutionists used to go, hey, we got all the evidence. Well, the funny thing about any kind of, let me help you this, in a crime, evidence is evidence. The defense has it and the prosecutor has it. It's the same evidence. Now what we have to worry about is the interpretation of the evidence. So when they say they have the evidence, they're already idiots because they don't have the evidence. The evidence is everybody's. What's the interpretation? Well, I can tell you my interpretation's better because I have a book with a starting point and a witness. They have absolutely nothing, and every time you turn around, when Henry Morris was teaching, when he probably first started working on it, the earth was probably 100,000 years old, maybe. I mean, he really wasn't fighting billions of years. He was fighting less. But see, every time they have a problem, oh, I got a problem with this. It doesn't work. Let's add another 1,000,000 years. Let's add another 1,000 years. Let's add another 2,000 years. You know, so that's where you get all that. And that's where it starts, you know, why are we at where we're at now? I mean, when you were in school, it was probably right at like 1.2 million years old. By the time I get to school, which is only a little over 12 years, 13 years later, it's at 4.5 million. Now all of a sudden it's 5.4 billion. You know, when Melody here has her children and her children are going to school, it's going to be a couple trillion years old. Why? Because they need time. Well, if it doesn't fit, add time. Time fixes everything. That's not true. You know, so anyway, when we look at this, look, evolution is false. It's a false science. Even Darwin wrote in his book that if my theory is correct, there'll be the transitional forms in the fossil record, basically, is what he said. I can't remember the exact wording of it. I said it perfectly like 2 days ago to somebody, but it's been a long week. So anyway, you look at that, and so what he says, if we can't find transitional forms, then his theory is incorrect. We can't find the transitional forms, and we're 155 years, 6 years later. 2011 was the 150 year anniversary. So we're quite a bit later, right? So why are we still arguing this thing? Why are we even discussing evolution? But see, Darwin's theory of evolution no longer is proper and right. You know, they all spout Darwin, but they don't believe a thing Darwin said. They've added so much more to it, you know. So it's interesting, even Darwin said it wouldn't be true and we've been through the fossil record. I mean, are we still finding fossils? Sure, but we really have been through the fossil record. All right, so John Baptista van Helmont, a Belgian scientist, was the first to recognize that many reactions produce substances that are, in his words, far more subtle or fine than the vapor, mist, or distilled oiliness through many times. So this guy is the one who coined the word gas. So, I mean, this is what he's known for, is that he forms the word gas. So, you know, you sit there, you watch steam. What do we call it if we see steam? It's a gas, right? So that's kind of the idea there. So he's also the guy, though, that comes up with spontaneous generation. Now, let's be honest. Intelligent man comes up with the thing that there is a gas. There's gases, right? But yet, he comes up to, if you put a whole bunch of dry shirts, Sharon, have you ever had, like, old shirts and stuff in the barn? And you get out there and there's mice? That's what he argues. Is that shirts and wheat in 21 days give you mice? Now, I would like to know what he thinks about how to get rid of mice, because since I've been in Kansas, y'all got like more mice than anybody. And I know why they get in houses, because the wind would blow them into Oregon or Washington or the other way, which would be nice. Wish the wind had come across and just take them all somewhere. But though we have wind, it doesn't do that, right? But that's what he comes up with. This is his idea, that if you take a whole bunch of dirty shirts, throw them on the ground, and you have some wheat with them, that all of a sudden, spontaneously, mice are going to show up. And you're all sitting there going, that is stupid. Right. But that was scientific then. So if you say, so notice what I said, science falsely so called. So what are we saying here? Look, they had false science back then they had to disprove, right? The earth was flat, now it's round. We even got people nowadays that run around going, the earth is flat. Are you kidding? My supervisor at work, the earth is flat. Oh my goodness.
I had an old aunt that believed the world was square. Honestly.
Right, because there's four corners of the earth, because the Bible says four corners of the earth. Oh.
She was all from like the 1930s Pentecostal type believing.
Hey, you know what? If God, the Lord says that the east is farther from the west, right? The reason he uses the east and the west is because the east never ends and the west never ends. But if we got a square table, then it's just as long as from the north to the south.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, come on. Help me out here, you know. So we get into this spontaneous generation. So you know, you end up getting maggots. So do you know, hello, this is hard. Do you know if you leave some meat, if you leave your ground beef out on the counter and you go somewhere and you forget to come back for a couple of days, you're going to find maggots? It magically showed up. They just spontaneously, there's maggots. Right. They believed that it spontaneously generated from the meat. Well, that can't happen.
But they didn't realize that flies who came to the meat was supposedly laid eggs. They didn't know this.
No, right. They laid the eggs and then it ends up, because why are they laying it on the meat?
Because that's what food is.
There we go. It's food. Why was the dirty shirt? Why did the mice be at the dirty shirt? Because the wheat. I mean, come on. You know, so then you get scientists believe that the flies generated from rotten meat. Now, if you look down here, this is an open container, and you put gauze on top, and you put parchment, and so it's going, look, if we have an open container, we have meat in the bottom, we get flies, we get maggots, okay, because the flies fly in. So here we put gauze, the flies sit on top, and then we get maggots on top. Why? Because the flies still believe that the maggots are, that they're going to be able to get to the meat, but they're not, right? But they're thinking that. But they laid the maggots. So right there on the second one, we know that there's no spontaneous generation from the meat, because with the gauze, we should have maggots at the meat, right? So we get to the bottom one, we get parchment on there, and guess what? With parchment, the flies can't smell the meat. They don't go and sit on top. They don't waste their time because they're looking for food. And so you don't have flies, and you got no magnets. Amazing, right? Man, I don't know how that happened, because if I was sitting down with old John Batiste over there, he'd be like, hey, spontaneous generation, scientific. It's a fact, right? Just like now, you get in these universities and they go, evolution, it's a fact. No. You know, what's funny is we get these kids, like he has that letter, the kids will sit there and they make it sound so good. If the kid would just turn to the teacher and go, what am I paying you for? I mean, I could get the same thing out of a coloring book. Because you're not making me any smarter. You're an idiot. And I say that because I went to college when I was I was 29. I was already a combat vet of three different tours. I mean, teachers weren't going to tell me anything that wasn't true. I'd get on them. I mean, I'd sit there and go, hey, did you take an economics class? And they'd look at you funny, and we're in a science class. Economics class, what do you mean? Look, I'm the consumer. I'm paying for you to do something. I need a return on it. Don't teach me how to make a cartoon when I'm in, science class.
They got the degree from Cracker Jack.
No, they got the degree from a Cracker Jack who was the next guy, and you go back, and I don't know why we've been paying for him. But I'm with you on that, So then, we get up here and you start looking, and we can go through these experiments. Well, Louis Pasteur is the one that proved that all this was wrong. He proved it wrong. Why? Because he used gauze and then parchment and all that. So we start going through all this. So look, so then we get to acquired characteristics. So look, if you work out, she your girlfriend or your wife?
Wife.
Okay. No, she better be your wife. All right, because otherwise you can't call yourself Christian, because that's just not how it is. But when you have kids, if you go work out at whatever gym for the next 6 months, and you got bicep on top of bicep on top of bicep, and you're walking around like Arnold Schwarzenegger, except for a little bit smarter, your kid ain't coming out that way. Right? Because that's what acquired characteristics says. Is that, hey, if you work out, the big guy that worked out all the time, his kids are going to be, good to go. So the giraffe comes from the horse because it kept stretching its neck, you farmers and horse and cow people, it kept stretching its neck through the fence because, the grass is always greener. You ever notice that? You can have some junk grass on the other side of the fence and the horse is going. And then you got to go and fix their wounds. Yeah, I owned horses once. I was like, man, you guys are dumb, right? I mean, you could put some really fresh cut, beautiful alfalfa right in front of them. I mean, cut it today, and they would sit there and put their neck through the fence. Oh, that's how they become giraffes. That's the thought process, okay? So if mom, if you tan, go to the tanning booth every day. Your kid's going to come out brown. Be good to go. Won't have any problems. Crazy. So acquired characteristics. You think that's his baby? It's not. That's his baby. Perfect. This guy's actually a preacher. And he's a pretty awesome preacher.
He can swim too.
Yeah, but he was born this way. But you notice he didn't pass on those traits. Right? So, acquired characteristics. These are all false sciences that have been out there for years that were disproven, and now we've moved on. Okay? The experiment that ended it. So the law of disuse. So if you don't use it, it'll go away. So a scientist, August Weismann, he sits there and he keeps cutting the tail off of all these mice for generations, right? Because let's be honest, mice they procreate real fast, and they don't really have a long life period. So you can get a lot of in there in a short period of time. So he keeps cutting them off for 20 generations of mice, and guess what? They still got tails. Man, this guy's having to cut a lot of tails off for 20 generations. That's a long time, right? And he can't prove that it's a loss of use thing. So when I was a kid, if your appendix was, left over from when we used to eat grass. Well, if that's the case, we eat salad. Why is that? No. So they said, when it has a problem, we'll just cut it out. We never needed it anyway because, it's old.
They call it vestigial.
Right. That's exactly the word for it. So they said, we just get rid of it. Well, then they find out that it's part of your immune system. Hello? But hey, that was good science then. Hey, I got nothing better to do. Let's cut out their appendix. I used to sit there and go, man, I either want my tonsils out or my appendix out because everybody gets ice cream. Hey, but you always hear the guy, I went to the doctor. You're like, where have you been in school for 3 weeks? Well, I had to have my appendix out. But man, I sat in that hospital. I got ice cream every day. I was like, man, how do I get that? Right? Forget it. You know why my immune system is good and I beat COVID? I got an appendix. No, I'm just messing. All right. There would not be evolution if the frauds weren't there. It's true. Wait till I start showing you some stuff. Frauds are all over the place. Every time they're disproven and they don't know what to do with it, they still use them. Okay? So, you see this right here? That's Monkeys to Man. 1859, his book of Origin of the Species, Darwin said, why, if the species have descended from other species by insensibility, fine graduations. So what is he saying? He's saying one cell at a time. So let's just go one cell at a time real quick. So somebody tell me, I'll give you $1 million, if you tell me which came first. The veins, the heart, or the blood? Say the blood. Because I'm going to tell you, if you got the blood, it's going to sit on the ground. If you got multiple cells of blood, it's going to pool. Where is it for? Nothing. If you got the vein, what do you need a vein for? You need it for the blood, right? Right. So when we look at the circulatory system, it can't be one cell at a time. What do you need a heart for if you don't have blood to pump and veins to pump it through? Do you see what I'm saying? So we can't have this evolution one cell change at a time. It can't happen. We have to have it all done at one time. Now you go, but why is it that we have the same systems as a monkey?
Amazing creations. We're all made with bones and blood. And
What's the difference between a Ford and a Chevy?
they all got
Neither one of them run, right? Yeah, they're all found on the road dead. Okay, but if we sit there, what's the difference between a Ford and a Chevy? Really nothing, right? What's the difference? Let me watch this. What's the difference between a tractor? This will mess up. Go to Yoder, and when you see the guy who's driving his tractor instead of his horse and buggy, because you know the internal combustion engine is evil. What's the difference? He won't get in a car, but he get in a tractor. What's the difference between a tractor engine and a car engine?
diesel and gas usually.
So we could go diesel and gas, but my pickup truck's diesel. What's the difference between a diesel engine and a gas engine?
I can tell you
One's combustion and one's compression.
for the Amish, it's because the tractor does work, so they're allowed to use that.
Yeah, that's only new in the last like 15 years. Because I remember when it was like you didn't do anything like that.
Candlelight.
It depends on the
Right, but, you know, when we get down to the end of it, though, when we look at the different engines, any kind of engine we look at, all the engines have pistons, right?
Rotaries.
Right, so when you look at all those things, what do you see what I'm saying? So why would God use the same systems? Because he knows what works. Right, it's basic. So now we start looking at these frauds. So here, Ernst Haeckel's chart. Anybody seen that in their textbook? Do you remember that in your textbook?
I'm trying to look and see what it is from right here.
So this is where you got like the salamander and the fish and the bird and the turtle and the pig and I can't remember everything else, but basically it's evolution in the mother's womb.
Embryos, yeah.
Right. So it's the embryology chart. It's Ernst Haeckel's chart. Here's the interesting thing about Ernst Haeckel's chart. Ernst Haeckel made this chart in 1868. He went to court and was proven a fraud in 1874. So how many years was that chart good?
8.
Yet we still have it in your textbook? Tell me why. Because watch this. That's ultrasound. Does it look like this? No, because it's not true. Look at the difference. This is an ultrasound. We don't have this here. It's different. Everything, every kind forms its own way. We don't have this. It's going through an evolution process. This guy had a great pen, a great hand, was a good artist, and an awesome imagination. And so he created this chart, and the reason it was disproven, let me see if I have that person down. He might be on the next slide. Anyway, there was a scientist at his time that actually started looking at embryos that were, dead. He didn't abort anything, but he found dead embryos, and he traced them in the lines, and they didn't meet. And so he basically got proven wrong. But this is 1874, and it's still in textbooks today? Are you kidding me? Why? I had a scientist one time. He had six doctorates. He was a chemist. And I was on a plane and I was talking to my wife about the pastor's meeting I was at, as big camp meeting I was at, and she was like, hey, so what was the preaching? I was telling her some of the great sermons, and after I got off the phone, that arrogant snot goes, and you believe that? And I said, absolutely. Every bit of it. He goes, how can you believe that with evolution? I said, and what part of evolution am I supposed to believe without more faith than I believe the Bible? And he looked at me and he goes, excuse me? You know, I mean, he thinks he's in control. You're not in control of anything, man. You know, and back then I was a lot better shape, and, you know, like I just got done being a cop. So throwing him out the window of the airport wouldn't have been a problem. You know, so I'm just thinking this guy's not in charge, but he thinks he is. So he starts talking about his embryo, he brings up Ernst Haeckel's chart first thing. I started laughing inside going, man, this guy's an idiot. I said, Ernst Haeckel, he calls it the scientific word for is like this really weird word of embryology.
Embryonic recapitulation.
Right, yeah, and I'm like, man, that word's there's too many letters in that word for me, you know. I mean, I'm a realist, not a weirdo, you know. So I'm sitting there going, so what chart are you talking about? He goes, well, you know, the one that did the embryos and and it goes through the evolution process in the womb. And I was like, oh, you're talking about Ernst Haeckel's chart. He goes, who's Ernst Haeckel? I said, well, if you know the chart and you got this big name, you can't even know the guy who drew it. That's what I said, drew it, you know, like a cartoon. And he goes, well, and I said, so here's the problem. And I go through the whole thing and I tell him, and he goes, huh. So I said, what else you got? Then I can't remember all the things. He hit me with these things and I countered them. And then all of a sudden they're loading the aircraft, right? And he's going to first class, so, you know, he gets to go first. So he's like, oh, I got to go. Yeah, you got to go because your butt's on fire, buddy. I didn't say it, but that's how I felt. You know, I was like, pfft. So he turns to me as he's getting me. He says, I got to go. I got to get seated. He goes, hey, so you think you won? I said, no, I don't think I won. I said, but this is what I do know. I don't doubt anything I believe, but you got to go check what you believe. And he looked at me and he goes, huh. I said, and if you don't, then you're not really a scientist. Because nothing he said, I had doubt. Everything he said, I countered, and easily. And I didn't work hard at it when he worked hard at finding out what he could throw at me, you know. So I give him my card and a track. And he goes, what's this for? I said, well, you might want to read it because my belief is in something real and true. I said, but when you figure it out, you need that track to get saved and to know Jesus. And if you need help with that, give me a call.
And most history is based off a few manuscripts, while the Bible has thousands.
And he said to me, he said, so you believe you won? I said, no, I didn't win. And no way in this do I win. I said, the only time that anybody wins is when you accept Jesus, he wins and you win. And he didn't know what to do with that, but he got on the plane. I don't know if he got saved after that. He might have. But it was just weird that everything he brought up, it was funny, everything he brought up, I had just spent time with some scientists that taught me it. And it was like God just laid it out. It was time, you know, and it was like, boom. And it was like I could take this 6-gun that I practiced, you know, pulling. Boom. And he, you know, he couldn't duck fast enough. So it was awesome, though, that I could do that, you know. I was like, man, this is exciting, that I could actually, you know, in a way, and I didn't do it sarcastically. I did it nicely trying to help him. You know, I tried to give him some love, even though I was feeding him dirt, you know, because, I mean, really, he didn't like what he was getting. So, you know, feed him bitter soup with a smile. So this, if you ever looked at Time magazine, what was that? It was the 80s, wasn't it, when this one came out? So this comes out in the 80s, and, you know, they're trying to prove that dinosaurs became birds. And they've been trying to do that for a long time. Problem is bird bones are hollow, lightweight. Dinosaur bones are heavy, right? I mean, because if a dinosaur bone wasn't heavy, would we be afraid of a T-Rex? No, we just throw a toothpick at it and its leg would break, right? So they get this, but here's the problem with it. So this comes out of China, and this is the fossil. But if you look, see where I have the yellows and the whites? These are multiple fossils put together to be made that way. And they're going, oh, we found the missing link between the bird and the... You know, they could have gone in my backyard and got one of my guineas. You ever seen a guinea? That head looks like it's like dinosaur, right? I mean, they look dumb, right? They're great, though, because they, like, kill snakes and eat all the ticks and fleas. So I like them. But they didn't have to go far. They could have just come to my house and got a guinea. But instead, they make this thing up so that they could have a dinosaur turning into a bird. They still run around with that today. Okay, now we start getting into those skulls, right? So we get to Pit-Down Man. Notice the shading. They didn't have a whole bunch. So that's it. Now all of a sudden we got this transitional form because we got one or two bones. Okay? So almost 40 years later, in 1953, Pit-Down Man was exposed as a forgery, mainly through the work of Dr. Kenneth Oakley. He showed that the skull was from a modern human and that the jawbone and the teeth were from an orangutan. Come on, you got to put two things together to make you see what I'm saying? But yet they're still teaching it. That was 1953. When were you in high school, sir?
I was in the early 70s.
Right. Do you know in the 80s I was being taught that was a transitional form? Why? 1987, I'm sitting in an anthropology class and they have this skull, and yet in 53 it's proven as a fraud. Nebraska Man. That's my pig tooth, that's right. So they find a tooth of a pig that's extinct in Nebraska. And they build an entire transitional form off of one little tooth. Let me pull your teeth. Let me pull one of your teeth. We'll throw it out here, and in 15 years I'm going to go dig it up, and I'll make an entire transitional form, make a ton of money. It'll go in Time magazine, and 5 years later you'll say, wait, that's my tooth. And you'll sue me, and I'll give you half. Because we'll plan it now, right? You know what I'm saying? And then in Time magazine, guess where they're going to rescind that? Back there in the little ads, they'll say, "Oh, that cover of Time magazine in 2022 or 23, 24. We'll go to next year, 24. That way it gets a little dirty. Was incorrect." You see what I'm saying? That's what they do. So here you got this. Here's what's funny: the pig it belonged to is a species of pig, and it's got that great scientific. This was found still alive. So first they thought it was an extinct pig, but then they found it in Paraguay in 1972. So my question is, the guy who lived in Nebraska who found the pig's tooth, did he go to Paraguay? I wanted to see his travel records, you know. Let's see what stamps on his passport. Because he planned it, and he made a lot of money off of it. So now we got the Java Man. Human fossil commonly known as the Java Man was found in 1891 by Eugene Dubois, who was the first person to deliberately search for human ancestors. Dubois was a former student of who? Ernst Haeckel. We already got a problem there, right? Because, and look, we're at what did I say, 91. 1891, and Ernst Haeckel was a fraud when? 1874. So I'm already questioning anybody who went to class under Ernst Haeckel, you know. So the skull cap was an ape, like having a low forehead and a large eyebrow ridge, and the following year, about 40 feet away, the workman uncovered a high bone, a thigh bone, that was clearly human. Due to the close proximity of the find, Dubrow said that it was a transitional form. So we got an ape, skull, and a thigh bone, and they're 40 feet away. I'm going to tell you what happened, since we can tell stories, right? Because we're talking evolution. The ape got busy eating on the human, and when the human's wife saw that, and she knew that he couldn't do all the work anymore, she ran after it, and she killed it. But he didn't run fast enough. He only got 40 feet. That's it. That's what happened. No, but you think about it. This is what they're coming up with. Why would this guy do it, though? Dubois does it because he's Ernst Haeckel's student. He wants to prove we want to get Moses, right? We want to get prayer out of the school. We want to get the Bible out of the school. We want to get all these things out of the school. Do you know what's funny? This same time period, there was a Frenchman that visited America. And you know what he said about America when he got there? Because he couldn't understand how America prospered better than any other country in the world. He said the only reason that America prospers is because of their religion. Because America is such a good and moral people because of Christianity. And yet, now look at us. We're almost like the French.
I mean, the Revolutionary War, we took on the largest navy and land force at the time.
Yeah, but have you ever really studied the history? I love war history. But if you ever study the history, there was no way with what Washington had when he was at Long Island, and that was only less than a year into the start of it. He should have been his entire military was on Long Island and should have been totally destroyed, except a fog came in.
God we trust.
Except a fog came in. Do you know why the fog came in? Because the night before he told his entire army to pray. He didn't say, if you're religious, pray. He said, pray. And they all prayed. Oh, no, we can go through. That happened. That's one of the main ones. But if you go through, you watch the Revolutionary War, God affected the weather so many times that the British Army didn't have the British Army wasn't fighting the American Army. They were fighting God.
8 out of every 10 bullets our revolutionary guys shot come from France.
Right.
You know?
That means they're Catholic bullets. No, I'm just messing. All right, Neanderthal. The Neanderthal skull was not a forgery, okay? But what they found out is, let me find where it is. He had a vitamin D deficiency, and it was the rickets, basically. And so if you study out rickets, that's kind of an interesting thing. But he's got bone deformities because of lack of vitamin D, and so that's why his skull was like that. Now, they found quite a few people that they put in that Neanderthal thing because there's quite a few people that have bone disease called rickets. You know, so not a transitional form. I mean, then we get to Lucy. Now, Lucy's interesting because Lucy has quite a bit of skeleton, but if you look right here where this hand is, and you look at the finger bone, you'll notice that the finger bone's curved. Now, if you look right there, now what's funny is if you and I walk, we're just hanging our hands down, we have our hands and they sit like this. Now look at her hand right there. I wish the picture was clearer, but you'll see that her hand is like this. Well, even if she straightened her hand as straight as she could, it would be curved because her bones are curved. Because she's an ape. What they did is they took this ape, decided it was a transitional form, dressed it up basically, and made the hands look straight so it would be human. That's all they did. But Lucy was all over National Geographic for a long time. When they finally found out it wasn't true and that she was actually a class of ape that they knew, they ended up putting they rescinded it in the back of National Geographic, and the article for rescinding it was like that big. So horse evolution. You start getting into this horse evolution. Can I tell you that every one of those is a horse? If we do find them and we do find those things, at the end of the day, we still have a horse. You know, so they sit there and they go, so is that the evolution they're talking about? No, it's still a horse. A horse is a horse, of course, right? I mean, it's crazy. So if you guys think I'm picking on you, I'm standing over here because every time I go by the projector, it hits my eyes and it's been freaking me out. So, so you're getting it because of that. Anyway, but you start going down that. Look, even if we find a fossil and it's a small horse, guess what it was? Small horse. You know, when we were in Montana, a guy calls me up one day, and I had one horse and some sheep, and a guy calls me up and says, "Hey, our big horse died, and we got this little horse. Would you come take it, Joe? Because he's just standing over where we backhoed the horse." So this little miniature horse was walking around the grave of the dead horse, you know. So they were like, "We don't have another horse, and we can't really afford to get one. Would you just come get it?" So I was like, "Sure, I'll come get it." So I load up the horse trailer, and I get ready to leave, and Molly, you know, she's still little. I can't say that out loud. But she was little. She was like 2.5. And I said, "Honey, I'm going to go get you a little horse." And she was like, "Oh." I said, "What color would you like it to do?" And she goes, "Blue." And I had no clue what this horse looked like. And so I said, "Okay, I'm going to try. I'm going to try to get you a blue horse." So I drove out of the driveway, went down, I think it was like 2 hours. Because the county was huge. It was 2,700 square miles. So like the from one end of the county to the other was like even further than Salina and Wichita. I mean, it's just ginormous, right? So it's 116 miles from one end of the county to the other, and it's all mountainous. So the roads go like this. So anyway, I drive down and I get this horse, and it's this little miniature horse. I mean, it was like 3 feet tall. And I put it in the thing and I bring it back, and it was basically what do they call them? It was a paint, but it was like that bluish gray. Yeah, it was a beautiful horse. Anyway, that little thing, if we'd have found it today, we'd be like, "Oh, transitional form," you know, just crazy. Okay, so it's a little horse, you know, but that's what we do. You know, we want to jump on these transitional forms. Why? Because it's good, and we're going to keep them even though it's alive. So there was a big push that bears, Charles Darwin pushed it, that bears and whales are the same. They come from, I was like, what? I said, I got it. When I saw this, Doc, because this is when I started studying creation, I was like, this is interesting. So Charles Darwin's sitting there and watching a bear swim, and then he watches a whale swim, and the mouth is open. That's how we get them. That's how we get everything together. We just look and see. So you know you're a girl because your mouth's open. Because her mouth was open a few minutes ago. So that's how we're going to come to this. That's scientific, right? That doesn't make any sense at all. So you start looking at it, and he says, like a whale, insects in the water, even in extreme cases is this. So you start going through this thing. So he sits there and he tries to compare the whale and the bear. Well, then you get people like this guy, Dr. William Clemens, and he's trying to tell you that this shark comes from a hyena. Now, notice where did he not look like he was sitting in modern furniture with a modern hairdo? I mean, at least, you know, not as modern as you, but, you know, 70s, right? So you're sitting there going, what? Even then, they're trying to reach? So years ago, if you went down to Glen Rose, Texas, and you go look at the dinosaur tracks there, anybody been there? That is the coolest thing. So you go to Dinosaur Track State Park in Texas, and just so you know, I went there the first time and they wouldn't let me through the gate because they had too many people in the park. So you actually have to go online in a month before, like reserve your spot. It costs you a little, but you reserve your spot and then you can go in that day. And so it was like, so January I decided I was going, so December, I'd reserve my spot, 30 days exactly, so I'd get in. Anyway, we go down there, and there used to be a sign there that paleontologists say that when a velociraptor or any three-toed dinosaur starts running, that when they plant their foot, they make five toe prints. Well, then they got rid of that. They didn't want the dinosaur track with the human footprint in it because it was too controversial. Well, first they say somebody carved it. Well, then they took an ultrasound to it and found that the density in the rock was showed the density if a human stepped into mud, how that density would be, and if the dinosaur stepped in mud, how that density. So it's actually true. Scientifically, it's correct that at the same time the mud was wet, a dinosaur went through there, and then a human footprint went through there. Now that rock is actually in a creation museum in Glenrose, right outside of there, but you don't see it in the river anymore. I didn't see it when I was there, but I think they wanted to take it out, so Dr. Ball down there grabbed a hold of it. But it's interesting that they're trying to get rid of that. Why? Because there's evidence. Well, why are you going to sit there? I'm looking at a human footprint. Trust me. Do you know what a footprint looks like in the mud? That's what it looks like. So how are you going to try to get me to understand that's a three-toed dinosaur when it got 5 little toes on it? You're sitting there going, scientists think we're that dumb. Help me out there. Because if a guy comes up and tells me that, am I really going to listen to anything he says? You say that, but how many people out there are listening to what these people are saying? It's ridiculous. So here I basically match what is the difference between the blue whale and it goes down, and basically there's no way that these things could come from it. And so here's the odds of a hyena mutating into a whale. Can I tell you if that can happen, I need to go to the casino because, man, I'm building a bigger church. I don't care if nobody comes. I'm just gonna have a luxury church. Somebody says, well, how big's your church? Well, it covers 40 acres. How many people are in it? Just me. That's all right, though. I can afford it. I bet on a hyena turning into a whale, So, John 14:6 says, Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. Look, they can make all the lies they want and they keep them. That's what I'm trying to show you. It's not true science, it's false science.
Even Google says it's a theory.
That's why it's science falsely so called. I even saw an argument with one of the major atheists, Stephen. No, it was no. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Started with a G. Anyway, he sat there and had an argument that a theory was more powerful than a scientific law. That scientific theory is more powerful than a scientific law. And I'm sitting there going,
Science has to be observed.
I read his whole thing, and by the time we were done, I was confused. So it was like,
Lost brain cells from it.
yes, Ghoul, that's it. All right, so are you all catching this? You got any more questions so far? Because Doc's getting ready to get up, and you're going to have a whole bunch more.
So is it true that the human brow ridge, especially in males, continues to grow throughout the whole life? So when there's humans that, pre-flood lived, 500 to even up
That they'd have the longer brow ridge.
they would have a higher brow ridge. And not to mention when babies, when they're really young, first born, and depending on where they lay on their head can shape their skull in different ways. Like, I went to school with a kid that kind of had a bulbous head on the back a little bit because he spent no time on the back of his head, so his head was a little bit more narrow and his back of his skull stuck out a little bit further than most people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, when I was a coroner, so when I was a sheriff's deputy up in Montana, I was also the county coroner. And there's sometimes that you're trying to investigate through skulls. And one skull I was looking at, you start looking at, so like our skulls is basically when we're born, we have those seams, you know, because you have multiple plates. And the seams are more open when you're little, and they start growing together. And what was interesting is one skull that the county, I mean the state medical examiner. We had one state medical examiner in Montana, and he was one of those scientists just fun to be around, because he'd go in an outhouse with you to go get a body. I mean, yeah, he was just like all in, and you'd understand that. And so, so if I had some place that was nasty to get into, I'd just call him and say, "Hey, Doc, you want to go?" And he'd be like, "How far is that from me?" I said, 3 hours. "Oh, wait on me, don't get started." You know, he was like that. So he's pretty exciting. So he loved his science. So he brings this skull out and he shows us this skull, and the seams are they're fairly far apart. They're not good suture for an older person, but there's no teeth. And where the teeth are, it's all worn, like they've been without teeth for a long. So you're sitting there looking at it, you're going to 80, 90-year-old person who lost all their teeth. And so he's like, "So how old is this skull?" Well, I'm sitting there, and the first thing I'm thinking is, this is a trick question, which was the best way to go in it, because everybody else is looking at no teeth and it all being, you know, smoothed over time. They're going, 90-year-old, you know, toothless 90-year-old. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, huh. And finally I'm like, 30, right? None of us are right. 17. Wow. Because she was meth. She was a meth head. But the suture, those suture lines in there between the plates were so large that didn't have time to grow. So that, you know, you think about that head is constantly in a yeah.
The same thing's on the roof of your mouth.
But you think about that and you sit there and go, you know, and those they would have a bigger brow and nose and all that, like Doc's saying. Think about this. So if Noah lived to 930 years, right?
Yeah, pretty big brow ridge, huh?
So what's a dinosaur?
Lizard that had enough time.
That live longer, because what's the one thing we know about any kind of reptile?
They never stop growing.
Right. They don't hit adolescence and then adulthood. They don't stop. They just continue growing by the environment. So if you were to have an alligator that was born at a foot and the environment was perfect, which back then the environment would be perfect, they would grow a foot each year. Do you ever look at Louisiana Fish and Game? They actually have a scientist that studied it out. So you have a foot-long alligator at birth, and every year it would grow a foot if it was in the perfect environment. Then in 100 years, how big would that alligator be? I don't know about you, but I'd be yelling dinosaur and run, you know. So, I mean, that's the whole deal. So, Doc, let's switch you to what do we need to put on for you?